form, and in Matthew in the form more familiar to most Christians. After this manner therefore pray ye, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth, as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. Matthew 6, 9-13. King James Version. Note that Jesus taught us to pray to the Father, our Creator, not to himself. In fact, he did not mention himself in any way, nor did he indicate that we should pray in his name. His instructions were very specific. We are to pray to God alone. Would this be the case if Jesus himself were God? Reported dying words even in the narration of his death. In the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, there is an incident that to some contradicts the concept of Jesus's divinity. According to these two references, Jesus was put on the cross and left to die. Then, as Mark reports it, are Jesus and God one and the same? 45 At 3 o'clock Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Mark 15:34. New Revised Standard Version. Is it logical that God would ever say, my God, why have you forsaken me? This utterance was recorded in both Gospels in Jesus's mother tongue, Hebrew Aramaic, thus emphasizing the accuracy of transmission. More recently it has been pointed out that these dying words are the beginning words of Psalm 22, a psalm addressing God, not words spoken by God. The psalmist here calls himself a worm, and implores for God's help. Upon you I was thrust from the womb. Since birth you are my God. Do not stay far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Psalm 22, 11-12. New American Bible Scholarly Developments. There has long been a great deal of debate among Christian theologians and scholars regarding the divinity of Jesus. This debate has intensified in recent years, and there seems to be an increasingly open concern over the truth of this doctrine. For example, the authors of The Myth of God Incarnate, the Westminster Press, 1977, p. X, concluded that Jesus was as he is presented in Acts 2:21, a man approved by God, for a special role within the divine purpose, and the later conception of him as God incarnate, the second person of the Holy Trinity living a human life, is a mythological or poetic way of expressing his significance for us. Other Christian scholars have questioned not only the claims that Jesus is God, but even that he publicly proclaimed 46. Development of the Christian doctrine himself to be the Messiah. On October 17, 1987, the Associated Press released the following news release. Street, Paul, Min. App. A group of biblical scholars known as the Jesus Seminar has decided that Jesus did not publicly proclaim himself the Messiah. The scholars say the belief that he did, held by many Christian denominations, was added to biblical texts by early church officials. The group is meeting at Luther Northwestern Seminary in St. Paul this weekend as part of a 5-year effort to reach a consensus on which sayings attributed to Jesus are historically accurate and which were added by others. Individual scholarly efforts to determine the historical nature of the Gospels, and of Jesus himself, are not new. What is unusual about this group is its effort to reach voting consensus, after study and debate. The group includes about 125 Roman Catholic, Protestant and non-Christian scholars. Seminar leaders admit the findings are not to be taken as truth, but rather as a scholarly theory of uncertainty. One example of the biblical phrases that the group claims are not authentic is in John 11:25, where Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will never die. In concluding that Jesus did not make such messianic claims, The group cites non-canonical and highly controversial sources such as the Gospel of Thomas and the hypothetical Q document. Arizona Daily Star, October 18, 1987. Significantly, the Jesus Seminar leaders admitted that their scholarly findings are not to be taken as truth, but rather as a scholarly theory of uncertainty. In other words, even leading scholars are still uncertain. One of the most important outcomes of the 1987 meeting of the Jesus Seminar is that the biblical statements in John 11:25-26 are not authentic. This is relevant to this chapter, since many Christians understand these particular verses to mean that Jesus is God. Are Jesus and God one and the same? 47 Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." John 11:25-26. New American Bible. The opposing view. Examination of verses. We have seen that there is significant scriptural evidence that Jesus was not God. On the other hand, there are numerous other verses understood by many Christians to mean that he was divine. The rest of this chapter examines many of those verses. It seems appropriate at this time to quote from Michael Goulder, staff tutor in theology, Birmingham University. Goulder states in The Myth of God Incarnate Ibid, p. 48, "In my early ministry I was still a trembling believer in Chalcedonian orthodoxy. Jesus was God the Son, of one substance with the Father, who came down from heaven. Trembling beliefs do not alter themselves. They are reinforced daily by the repetition of the liturgy. When I look back, I think that the firmest plank on which my creed rested was the familiar passage in John 1, 'The Word became flesh and dwelt among us.' This was not alone, for there were similar statements in Col 1 and Phil 2, and hints of the same in many of the Pauline letters, and in Hebrews. Where had St. John got the doctrine from? Not from Jesus." In these lines we see some of the biblical references understood by many people to mean that Jesus is God. We also see in the same lines that Goulder found those roundabout statements do not bestow divinity upon Jesus. 48. Development of the Christian doctrine. Since Michael Goulder, at least for a period in his life, was a typical Christian, let us look at the biblical references that led him to believe that Jesus was God. "And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth." John 1:14. New Revised Standard Version. This verse makes a clear distinction between the Word and the Father.